Greetings, as I, Tantus Naraman Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome one and all. Are you ready for another exciting day for us to chat about tabletop? I'm, of course, ready. We're going to be diving into the Shadowrun world once more, talking about another country. Back to the Sixth World we go, as we are going to be talking about the California Free State today. So I hope you're very excited. So if you're joining me, you can always be joining me live later on Twitch, which is over there on the side. Or if you're joining me later on YouTube, remember, for you guys there, liking, ringing bells, subscribing, all those other kind of great things to support the channel, please just, helps out along the way. All the stuff you need to do on YouTube, all the other support stuff. It's great. Have any of you out there, whether you're on Twitch or YouTube, dealt with the California Free State in your Shadowrun adventures? I personally, for running, never used it, and I haven't been a player in much Shadowrun, and even that I haven't encountered. So neither of those opportunities, it really showed up. So that's a thing to keep in mind. I haven't, but it was fun reading up and learning about Free State. So, all right. Shall we start with the basics of what books you might want to look into? Because I kind of usually start with that. Sources I feel like is a great idea for further research if you want to look into it a little more. And there's a bunch of books that you can look into. Now, I used a number of books myself personally, and I can say which ones they were. But these are all the books if you're looking into a larger picture, more than I'm just talking about here. You want to go deeper, give you that option. Of course, from first edition, the California Free State book. This is a first edition book, so it's not going to have nearly as much information as later books. Again, because time goes forward, more stuff happens in the storyline. But this will give you a generalized chunk of information for the original setup for the California Free State. Now, Shadows of North America is one of the two main books I used for my research for this one. This is a third edition book. It delves into many of the North American countries and gives a pretty good setup for California. It does kind of set off not the full timeline, because there's some updates to California that's important to talk about post this time period, but this gives you a really good amount of it and some in-world chatting references to it. Also, Year of the Comet gives some updates on things that are related around there, and it dives into depths of one of the major historical events going on around there, with the Japanese occupation and unoccupation, kind of to say, of the San Francisco area and beyond. We'll talk about it, but this kind of shadows and gives more information around that. And of course, if you want to go into 4th edition, Sixth World Almanac's a great place to look to for some updates. And that's the other book that I particularly used when diving into it. Alright. Here is the flag. I'll do this one. Of the California Free State. And why don't we start by talking about some basic information about it. Now, it is, of course, known as the California Free State. Pretty easy name. About 20 million people is the population. So that's not a huge population in comparison to what you think of, California today, for a large state. But again, a lot of stuff happens. The California Free State is not all of California as we know it. A lot of things like that. Its primary languages are English, which is the official one, and of course Japanese. There was an occupation for a large number of years. Its different regions are the Mojave Desert, Big Sur, Northern Crescent, Central Valley, and the Bay Area. Those are its 5 states, and I'll talk a little bit about those in later on here. It's an elected republic, nominally. Its biggest neighbors are the, of course, the Pueblo to the kind of east and south. Yes. And of course, to the north, you have Tarnagir. I butcher that every time I said that name. Tanagir. we're kind of a temperate coastline, northern mountain region, fertile inland valleys, mountains, high deserts, and Mount Shasta area, the northern disputed zone are pretty important. Sierra Nevada mountains, Yosemite Park are all in this region. Other statistics you, of course, might want to know about are that it is, in general, around the 60+% human. The next largest population is orcs, which sits around between 15 to 20%. Then sizable chunk of dwarfs, elves, trolls, and other. Generally speaking, about 32% were sinless at the time of the occupation, with about 27% below the poverty level, 48% affiliated with corporate, and the currency is the Nuyen, but they do have their own money that is used too, so keep that in mind if we're talking about them. They have the California Free State dollar, which 5 of them is approximately 1 Nuyen. So keep that in mind. Alright. And that's some basic statistics on California. Just so that you kind of know some intro to everything that's going on here. Now, we can't talk about the California Free State without talking about its history. And this is a map of America of 2072. So this is pretty accurate, and you can see kind of in the side over there, in the little corner, the California Free State. I'm going to kind of highlight it with my mouse here. It's over in this area here, of course, where California is. And it's had territory eaten up by Aslan, the Pueblo Corporate Council, and Tir Tarnanana. The Corporate Council technically sort of ate up territory, but that's a thing to discuss around its history. So, everything stems first from the Treaty of Denver. Because the Treaty of Denver left California part of the United States of America. But it did something very major for the state. It basically isolated it. It separated it out from the rest of the United States completely. And it kind of disenfranchised them. They were far away from the government. And that leads us into the 2030s. We're post the treaty. There's this idealism of basically, hey, we've been kind of screwed over here. We're not getting aid. We're not going to get help. We need help. We need assistance. And the idea of secession really hit its stride after the United States merged with what remained of Canada, and we formed the UCAS. California considered it. They basically went to the UCAS government for some concessions and aid, and they threatened secession if they weren't kind of granted any assistance. And you know what the UCS did in a very bold move? They basically just kicked them out in 2036. They basically removed them from the Union. They were like, well, you don't want to join us and help us. Yeah, you can be on your own. There you go. Sorry. California became its own nation instantaneously, and they weren't ready for it. And this is shown in some things that happened. Tir Tarnagir invaded from the north. They pushed down all the way to Reading, and were later pushed back to Vreka. Aslan captured San Diego. The Japanese Imperial State invaded San Francisco. So, yeah. And during this time, several districts attempted to secede from California. So there's political unrest, instability. This new nation of the California Free State, with a somewhat central government, came into being. Now the area between Vreka and Reading became a contested zone. That's on the map. We can talk about that a little bit. But yeah. So internally, things aren't great. We've got territory that was lost instantaneously. We have a disputed territory. We have people occupying San Francisco. Not in good shape. And the government basically tried their best to cope with the issues. In 2046, we get to that point in time where Los Angeles becomes a free city. And what remained of the California Free State divided into the 5 territories we know it now, each having their own political views and very little government cooperation between any of them. The Japanese still held the Bay Area and included the capital of Sacramento under their California Protectorate. California being free was in this question. There were metahumans that were being mistreated in this area, and General Saito's who controlled here. A little after a while, the Pueblo Corporate Council took Los Angeles and incorporated it into their territory, and they also took a chunk of the Mojave Desert from the CFS. We are in a difficult time. Places lost a lot. Getting into the California Protectorate, we really have to talk about the fact that the Japanese imperial state had been there, but they were supposed to withdraw in 2061. Basically, the eruptions in the Ring of Fire led the imperial state to recall their marines that were deployed overseas, and that included in San Francisco. Except they resisted, and 2 divisions led by Keiji Saito stayed behind and cooperated with friendly Japanicorps and the human nation to expand their presence. Remember, Japan had always been kind of a little anti-metahuman. Well, very anti-metahuman, until recently. So that sentiment was still there, and welcome everybody that's coming in here. Welcome, welcome. And effectively, that's when they took over and became that protectorate. They expanded their influence into that region, the California Protectorate. If you look at a map during that time period, effectively California has this entire area that's conquered and separated from it in the center of it. It's this terrible thing going on for them. So the Japanese generals had just taken over here. And it was 2061 when Pueblo Corporate Council basically took over Los Angeles because of some other issues going on there. It was a conquest of Los Angeles, but Los Angeles had basically broken out into near chaos for a variety of reasons. So we're not going to talk about Los Angeles today. It's more related if we talk about the Pueblo Corporate Council. I'll talk about its history. But yes, it became independent in the 2046, and unfortunately, it didn't last as an independent system. So now, we get into that late 2060s, early 2070s. Also to know, there's one more thing history-wise in between here I should mention. The Great Dragon Hestabe joins the Tyr High Council of Princes in 2062. This is going to be important for stuff we talk about later on. Right now, not important. That's part of Tyr. We're talking about California. How can that be important? Oh, it will be. Trust me. Because Hestabe, that nice contested area? That's where Hestabe is. Basically, Hestabe has been keeping things in check there. Now is also part of Tyr. Interesting. Just a little bit interesting stuff there. So it's about 2068 that finally California, with some corporate backing, especially from Ares, basically were able to mount a successful battle and resistance and finally take out the rogue General Saito and basically drive him out, reconquer their nation, and bring California Free State once again under the control of its true own government. No longer is this general basically puppeting things in the center of the country. And yes, there was probably not a lot of help from certain territories, but they were kind of on their own. It's like the core territories were once again free. And that's the biggest things we're at when we're getting into the 2070s. So yes, this is 4th edition, 5th edition, 6th edition have happened, where time has gone ahead of but no major changes have really been described as happening in California, so just keep that in mind. Alright, let's talk about the 3 major cities in the Free State. Here's that nice map of it. Here's the current map of it, which is actually in the 4th edition book. I like it here. So there are 3 main cities that we talk about when we're talking. This shows more of them, but the 3 main cities, of course, Sacramento, the capital, San Francisco, and of course, to the north, Redding. Redding is important for a number of reasons, and mainly because it's nice near that like big old red area, which is the contested zone. Yeah, that's shows off that a lot there. And you can also see Los Angeles part of the federal area, along part of the Mojave Desert. Sacramento, it's the capital. In the last year, in the years since the general was overthrown, 4th edition picks around 2072, so this is like 4 years after the general. The government has basically been able to rebuild their stuff. Basically, the government was not quite in Sacramento during his control, when he had his troops there. You know, now metahumans no longer have a curfew. They're allowed in all areas of the city. It is at the Central Valley agricultural business. Basically, it's the center of the agriculture in California. Remember, I said there's 5 areas. One of them is Central Valley. Central Valley, center of it, Sacramento. Kind of like an obvious thing there. Horizon and Pyramid Enterprises are very large corporations. There's smaller ones, family-owned farms. Agriculture is the big business here. Along the Sacramento River, the city is connected to San Francisco Bay by a man-made channel. This allows mid-sized cargo ships to dock in the city, actually. Roadways and railways are maintained around Sacramento. Not as much when Saito had regime. The only thing about, having a kind of semi-dictatorial regime is they very maintain areas that they can send their troops very quickly. Infrastructure. And some in the agricultural business are worried that infrastructure is not going to last. If you're looking to populations, about 500,000, and does have growing metahuman populations. The refugees that were driven out by Saito's regime for so many years are cutting back now. Now, San Francisco, on the other hand, had been occupied by these things far longer. And it's finally getting its face lifted back to something historically it was in the last 4 years. But it's had its limits far longer than even Sacramento or a lot of other portions of California were. San Francisco was really occupied since, the 1930s. So, yeah. It's rather than a small period of maybe, half a decade, we're talking 30 years. Metahumans are able to remain. Some traditional atmosphere of acceptance in San Francisco is returning to the city. It's getting new life into it that's lost. Those corporate investments are coming back. Tourism, which was a big thing in the city, is returning. Things like the Golden Gate Bridge, Nob Hill, Fisherman's Wharf, the waterfront area, with restaurants and hotels, are becoming tourist places again. The cable cars were restarted in 2070 and run on a regular schedule. The University of California San Francisco campus reopened in 2069. It's becoming alive again. The city had suffered far longer than many of the other places. It's returning to life. Corporate facilities are spreading out into suburbs like areas Silicon Valley Enclave, where they've got their cutting-edge matrix R&D research. MCT has corporate faculties and facilities in San Francisco as well. Several high-size at Soma, south of Market neighborhoods. Soma has that territory has some smaller companies, some startups to single A corps that rent out space from various buildings. And if you're looking at it, it's got its 2 major faults still, so keep that in mind. Okay, now we talk about Redding. We have to talk about why Redding is important, because it is the central point in the Northern Crescent area of the CFS, the northern area. It is the border between Tyr, Carnegie, and the CFS. There's an active military presence in Reading constantly. Now, much of that military is not actually the full military of the CFS. It's local militia, recruited and trained and paid by towns in the Northern Crescent, rather than money from the CFS. It's kind of separate. Now, Reading was also the destination of many metahumans that relocated from the Protectorate Zone. And so there's a lot more meta-types, metahumans, up in this northern region. So, because of all these factors, the Northern Crescent really doesn't have a lot to do with the CFS government. There's plenty that in Reading that feel like when you're in Reading, it makes it feel independent from you. It has a population of about 100,000. It's the largest in that area. It's home to the popular the Northern Crescent Free State movement, which advocates seceding from the CFS. And agriculture is the primary thing around the area. It's very rural. And it does a large trade in talisman, mostly via black market channels. So talisman, if you're unaware of what they are, they're materials used for making talismans for magic users. Remember, Shadowrun, it's a magic world, so, it's a future world where magic came back. People make talismans, magic items that you use for your magic. And yes, it's got a trade in those. So keep that in mind. That's a big thing to keep in your mind. Alright, so now we have a view of what this entire area is. We know the different regions here. To a degree, certainly we've been to, Central Valley, Bay Area, and things like that. But we should talk about a couple other regions, just a little bit here, to be on their own. We've got the Big Sur. We do have to talk about the Big Sur a little bit and the Mojave Desert, because those are regions that we're not really touching with cities, and I do want to hit on them a little bit. So this is kind of like an area of pirates, to a degree. The Calfree's Pirate Coast, and we're north of there. There's some repercussions. There are 3 big pirate kings in Big Sur. So it's an area led by piracy to a degree. Smugglers, corporate interests. So there is some things going on, but the Big Sur is a smuggler's paradise. And of course, the Mojave Desert. It's a place filled with magic. It's a reason that certainly the Pueblo Corporate Council may want it. Again, it's one of the Native American nations. They're the people that kind of, not necessarily the only ones, but we're one of the early people that reinvented magic, rediscovered it. It's an important part of everything about them, a lot of their technical beliefs now. Pueblo might be corporate, but they're self-corporate and they still are Native American people. So yeah, crazy magic, mostly desert. It's the Mojave. If you know a little bit about Mojave, certainly corporate interests are in there trying to exploit that. You have to keep that in mind. The Anazazis are in the region, the locals there, and they deal with bandits and problems like that and have fights of their own, kind of putting it on its own too. So you can see, again, each of these regions are fairly non-connected, save for maybe the Bay Area and Central Valley are really the only ones that are kind of connected through trade, but mostly they are pretty disconnected. Interesting. We should talk about the economy of the region. Now I'm just having some Shadowrun pictures here. So I found some nice Shadowrun pictures earlier when I was looking for pictures of California, and I decided those would be nice to share here. So, the crash of 29 destroyed California's computer industry, and the establishment matrix kind of went beyond it. Now, part of this agency did relocate to Pueblo, and there's still some higher than the Puerto Council, and drew with it some higher standards of living that way. But San Francisco does remain an economic hub. Japanicorp still dominated, even though, yeah, they're not having the same kind of power that they had under Saito, but still, nonetheless, they dominate in a lot of the corporate goings-on in that region. And, of course, there's crude oil from the Vatican Council that comes through here. And, of course, the United Talismongers Association does have its headquarters in California. If we're talking about corporate presence, Ares is very present in Silicon Valley and has a lot of influence. Hey, they helped the place rid it of, I don't know, an overlord that had conquered part of it, technically. Sort of a conquest. Occupied, protectorated it. And so Ares is pretty big on that one. And Ares does own Edwards Ares Space Base, which most space plane flights into orbit go there. And Ares has control of China Lake and the Iokan test range sites. As technology was banned from business in the 2050s, but Pyramid Operations, who bought the As Technology Pyramid in San Francisco, is basically a shell of the megacorp. Federal Boeing has some influence there, Kenshi Electronics, Lockheed, Nippon United, Novatech. Planet Link has some in Sacramento with their headquarters, Renraku's Computer Systems, Seder Krupp with Angelic Entertainment, Tokugawa Technologies, Wuxing, and Yakasashi with Biogen. So there's a lot of corporate presences in here. Now, granted, some of them were there to begin with, so it's not like they moved in, but, it's one of those things. It's like, there's so much corporate presence there. Yeah, San Francisco, big cities, California, there was always a big corporate presence, so it's not changed much, honestly. A little. Yeah, certainly, got to deal with mafia and then the smuggling separately in the big sur. Now, one last thing I want to talk about is some normal special places. Now, this is also just a nightclub. Technically, this one's in Seattle. It's Dante's Inferno. But again, I like the looks of it, and so, I wanted as an example of there is a nightlife in here, too. But there's also some important places, and we now turn back to what I talked about and a dragon, because we have to look to Mount Shasta. It's in the contested area between Tyr, Tarnagir, and CFS. It is sort of part of the California Free State, and at least sort of part of the Northern Crescent. And it's due to who leads over the Shasta region. Heston. Hesteby rules the Shasta region. Pretty uncontested. Calls the mountain her home. And now her title is Prince of Tyr, Tarnagir. Hesteby still, even with that title, has sided with the Northern Crescent in matters of territorial dispute. She's basically the reason the territory continues to be disputed, rather than being finally fully conquested by Tyr, Tarnagir. It's an interesting juxtaposition, is basically the Tyr Tarnagir bribed a dragon to basically probably kind of remain neutral, but also can't quite use that power to convince her not to side with the people of Northern Crescent. So it's outside political significance, and doesn't have a lot of resonance. So Mount Shasta is a pristine countryside, breathtaking views. Its White Calf Mountain is actually one of the few peaks in the Cascades that did not erupt during the Great Ghost Dance. So that's an interesting fact about it. It has Shasta Dam, which controls and provides water for much of California Free State. It has been the target of corporate and military actions, despite Hesteby's presence, but has maintained itself, and of course Lake Shasta's there. On the astral plane, the mountain glows like a beacon, and since Halley's Comet passed, numerous magical activities around the mountain have increased tenfold. There are free spirits, some herds of animals called Shasta deer, and magic in the area is aspected towards nature. So ecotourism, some tourism, especially ecotourism, is allowed in the region. So camping, hiking, and stuff like that. But the forces, forests, and spirits will attack anybody who tries to defile the region. Keep that in mind. So talisman hunters who are looking for materials in a magical place to make talismans, yeah, they might have to fight against the nature itself to grab those. So legal talisman can be purchased in the Mount Shasta city. Basically, I guess you could say ethically created or ethically farmed this material, at least as far as the magical mountain considers, and its spirits and stuff. You know, the Magic Mountain, Mount Shasta. But it's really the other big place we have to kind of talk about, because talking about this talks about why the disputed zone exists. And that's kind of the state of the California Free State as it is now. It's interesting to see that, unfortunately, California has suffered heavily. It's a country in name only in a lot of ways, unfortunately, too. You have to think about what happened. Sure, there were talks of secession, but it really the fact that they were so disconnected from the rest of the U.S., and they just wanted some more help. They tried to use it as a threat, and you know what? They were kicked out. Kicked out and picked apart by their neighbors, attacked as soon as it was like they were surrounded by wolves, who as soon as the shepherd turned away from the lamb, they pounced on it, tore it apart. It has barely survived because of, one, a great dragon to its north. Two, certainly Aslan would have to deal with more of the Pueblo Corporate Council. And yes, the Corporate Council did assimilate some territory, but it's also like if Mojave and LA had already broken away, so it's sort of like, it's very neutral. But also I feel like the Free State doesn't mind the buffer, because Aslan is a very aggressive kind of country, and that way it keeps a little bit of a buffer. Yes, Aslan still has San Diego. Yes, it kind of conquered that south there. It included some things, but it didn't spread north for a number of reasons at the time. But still, it did its damage. California shrunk greatly. It's 5 territories, with many of them kind of on their own. You think of, like, Mojave, it's there. Northern Crescent, it's there. Big Sur, it's a pirate smuggler's haven. And then you just have the Bay Area and Central Valley, which are, well, haven't been free for very long from control of basically Commander Saito, an overlord who took it over. Shit is happening in this country. The California Free State has suffered greatly, and certainly this is probably its most stable it's been in a long time. It no longer has any influence from outsiders. Hesteby keeps Tir Tarninger to the north at bay. Pueblo Corporate Council, they're probably, generally speaking, in good terms, but hard to say if that will last. They're certainly not Aslan. And in return, each of those 5 territories is kind of independent, yet not. Like, the central government of California is just... CFS government just is so weak. This is finally an opportunity to start reuniting things, but it's taken them, what, 35 years to get to a position where they can finally start uniting their territories. You have to think about how long. San Francisco occupied, that's the control of one of their regions, the Bay Area. The attacks from various directions, the things that were going on, the various crashes, diseases, problems. Then eventually a conquest of their central territories in this protectorate zone, where probably a good chunk of their population is. But remember that Northern Crescent's rural. Mojave Desert is a desert. Big Sur, well, it's a pirate and smuggler's haven. Probably plenty of people there, but it's more criminal oriented, so it's probably not very populous. So yeah. Anyway, I find it interesting that maybe, like, I would like to see an update from 6th edition about what's going on in a lot of countries, and just an update for, like, how California's done over a decade. I'm curious, how they've maybe been able to stabilize, rebuild things, come into a better situation than they were, honestly, in 4th edition. 4th edition's the start of them building into a better thing. I would like to see where it goes. We'll leave it there. I liked talking about this one. It's a very interesting one. It tells a lot of history and a lot of connection with what goes on in a lot of places. Like this kind of country example could probably be placed in a lot of countries throughout the 6th world. And a lot of them, we don't know a lot of this history, but a lot of similar things to this of, like, losing territory, dealing with outside aggressors, all this kind of stuff has happened with the chaotic nature of the 6th world. And, it's interesting to see we have a good example of that chaos. Decentralizing of the main government, that kind of stuff, and a lot of that. And locals or corporates being more interesting. If you want to see more stuff, I do these gaming streams Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, backup day, usually early to mid-afternoon. I have a live play, Crimson Queen, Wednesdays, 9 p.m. EST. Check that out. Pathfinder First Edition, very fun. Discussing Tabletop Saturday at 6 p.m. That's my normal tabletop schedule. You can always check it on Twitch. Check it after a while. That's live then. But later on YouTube, I do other gaming streams. That's all my tabletop stuff. I have social media, Discord, Twitter, link below. Hey, there's other great ways to support the channel. Keep in mind, is anything you want to do, support it. Great. Thank you. All right. Everybody, I'm going to get going. Until the next time we chat about tabletop, I bid all of you a deep and wonderful farewell.